Hi, everybody. I'm just waiting for people to continue joining. Um, just to let you know, just while I admit people into the webinar, we are going to be recording this GreenGrass introduction webinar. If you do have any questions or queries, you're more than welcome to wait for the sessions where there will be pauses and times for questions throughout this webinar. But if for any reason, if you don't feel comfortable to ask those, you're more than welcome to post those in the chat. If we do run out of time and people do have a hard stop, and there is a question you'd like to post to the team and to the panel, we're more than welcome for you to email them to myself. Also, you can put them in the chat. And what we will do is when we put this webinar up on our YouTube channel, what we will do is we'll try to address any questions that we have not been able to answer within the webinar. As I said, anybody that's just joined, this webinar is being recorded. If you can keep all of your microphones on mute, that would be really appreciated. Again, anybody that's just joined, we will have sessions for questions throughout this webinar, but also if you don't feel comfortable asking questions over the webinar, you're more than welcome to email them to myself, which is Philippa Horn at ORC, or you're more than welcome to email them in the chat, and we can try and answer those after the webinar. So that's all introductions. I'm now going to hand you over to Julia Cooper, who's going to lead this webinar.
Great. Thanks, Philippa. And welcome, everyone. It's great to see so many of you joining us on this beautiful afternoon when I'm sure most of us would rather be outside in the sunshine. But we're going to talk today for the next hour or a little bit more maybe about the GreenGrass Project. So this is our launch webinar, and it's a good opportunity for us all to find out more about the project. So I'm going to first of all just not spend too long because I'm going to hand it over to our panel members. But just to introduce myself, so I'm Julia Cooper. I'm a crop diversity and agronomy researcher here at the Organic Research Center. And I'll introduce a few people right away. From the ORC, we have Philippa, you've just met. We've also got Katrina Willoughby. Maybe you can wave, Katrina. And I don't see Julia's here, the other Julia. Oh, there she is. Yes, Julia. So both Katrina and Julia are going to be working on the GreenGrass project in the next couple of years. And we've also got some sort of erstwhile panelists who are going to be speaking. So just to quickly say who they are, and then I'll let you know when it's your turn to speak. But we've got James Standen here, who's the new Farms Director at Newcastle University. He's up on the top right of my screen. Hopefully you can see him there. We've got Elaine Jewkes, who is a soil scientist, grassland advisor who works on nutrient management planning, soil management directly with farmers. We've got Paul Muto, who's a grassland advisor and woodland advisor with the North Pennines National Landscape. And we've also got Alma Joensen, who's joining us from Wales. I think you're in Wales, right, Alma? From Car Y Mor, which is an interesting business over there that produces some biostimulants. So just to give you a quick intro to the project, I don't have any slides or anything. I just thought I'd tell you about it. A couple of years ago, the Co-op Carbon Innovation Fund put out a call for applications to do projects related to reducing fertilizer use in agriculture. They become aware that one of the big sources of carbon emissions in agriculture was fertilizer. So we saw that and we thought, well, that's a good opportunity to work on something around fertilizer with conventional farmers, because we actually don't work exclusively with organic farmers at all, right? We work with all sorts of farmers, just promoting sort of more organic, low input ways of producing food. So we thought, let's target grass systems, because intensive dairy farms do use a lot of nitrogen on their grass. So we came up with the project, pitched it to the Carbon Innovation Fund, and long story short, they didn't fund it. They didn't think it was exciting enough, sexy enough. So we didn't get it funded that way, but then our team went on to look into other ways to get the project funded because we all really liked it. And we've ended up getting funding from the Charities Aid Foundation, the Nineveh Trust, and Esme Fairbairn. So definitely have to thank those three organizations for supporting this work. So thanks to them. So what we're doing, the idea was always that we would go out and meet farmers, talk to them about how they were managing their grasslands, particularly dairy farmers, and then work with them to sort of evaluate flows of nutrients on their farms, nutrient budgeting, carbon footprinting, which is something we're doing within the project, and look at ways that we could reduce their fertilizer use on grasslands. So it's very early stages yet. And in a minute, you're going to meet James, who is at Newcastle University, one of my former colleagues. So I went to James, um, hoping he might want to still collaborate with me after I'd left Newcastle University. I knew we had a dairy farm over there with grass, and I thought he might be interested in doing some kind of trials on the farm. So we've started there this year with some simple strip trials, looking at different fertilizers, foliar and granular, and also looking at some of the different biostimulant products on the market, and how they might interact with different fertilizer types and affect grass production. So that's the trial this year that we're going to be having, featuring in one of the Newcastle University's open days coming up, and also maybe later in the season have another event at the farm when we've got more results. So that's kind of just a simple trial about different ways to maybe reduce fertilizer using some of the products on the market. That's our first step, but we're hoping through that to meet more farmers and generate more interest in the project, and then go out to visit farms and come up with strategies they can trial on their own farms. And of course, a big part of the project is the knowledge exchange work that Philip is leading on, producing useful information, fact sheets, websites, videos, etc., to just document what works. So that's kind of the whole idea with the project. We're really interested in networking with other individuals and organizations working in the same space. So we have been in touch with AHDB. I can see Tom Goatman from the British Grassland Society on the call, and yeah, other groups that might be working in the same area. So that's what this is about today. And today we're really just wanting to talk to a few people with different ideas and perspectives on how to reduce nitrogen fertilizer use, and also have a good discussion with those of you on the call about your experiences, your ideas, your questions about it. And hopefully we can kind of, yeah, all share our knowledge together and come up with some innovative new ways to address the challenge. So I think that's all I'm going to say.
Okay.
Yes, you want to go ahead, Elaine, now? Yeah, perfect. Okay, I'll just turn off my mic and yeah, you go for it.
Okay. That'd be important. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks, Julia Philippa, for the invitation to join in the webinar. It's great to be involved. Yes, very whistle-stop tour on utilising N-well and minimising losses. So I think I feel like the baddie here. I feel like I'm the fertiliser person in an organic world, but hopefully that's not the case. But please be assured, I'm very much personally have a broad church. So very quick overview of the trends in fertiliser use. I've got a big bar. That's it. The trend is very much down, which is good news in a lot of senses. You can see this is from the latest British Survey of Fertiliser Practice, and you can see that there was a big drop, obviously, when Mr. Putin did his thing. It's come slightly back up, but overall, the trend for grassland, this green line, is very, very much down and has been for a long time. The slight caveat there is, the question is, does that always mean that nitrogen is used to its optimum? And we could argue that one, but I've only got a few minutes. So to go back to the very, very basics, and apologies if this is too noddy, but soil tests, know what you have to know what you need, and just these are the recommended optimum levels according to the fertilizer manual. P index 2, potash index 2 minus, mag of 2, which would be a change, and pH of 6. And particularly given that we're talking about legumes a lot here, pH is very important. You can see why on this chart, because as the pH approaches, gets closer to neutral and gets into this recommended 6 to 6.5 band, the main nutrients become more available. And also, almost as importantly, or perhaps in some cases more importantly, the nasties like iron and aluminium become less available at a more optimal pH. The other side to that is when you've spent money on a nice new ley of whatever kind, being at an optimal pH, partly through this nutrient availability, will help yield, but it also helps these sown species stick around. And for clovers, that's particularly important. They really like good conditions and optimal pH over 6 and good P and K status. That comes with a little bit of a health warning. It's in dairying. I don't see it often, but you do occasionally see pH not adjusted, and this is the latest report from PAG, which is a consortium of the laboratories. And last year's report found that there was only 32% of the grassland samples they analysed were in this bracket, and scarily 11% of them were actually down here in this bracket, which is a little bit worrying. That said, they are grassland samples, so they could be upland livestock, not just lowland dairy. And happily, about a third were sort of in this ballpark, which is at least easily remedied to the optimal pH. So, you know, it's a simple but important point. The part of this, or, you know, moving on from that, it sounds fairly obvious, but don't, you know, as far as possible, don't buy or don't apply what you don't need. And a very simple example here, phosphorus on grazing, were the soil to be index 1, the recommended rate is 50 kilograms per hectare of phosphate. If you apply double that, you can see from this trial work, you don't get any more yield. If you really push the boat out and tripled that, you might get a touch more, but it really wouldn't be worth the expense. And for example, on grazing, the required amounts of phosphate are really quite small. So it's worth taking that soil test into account. But for the other reason as well, because you really do need to apply what you do need, which possibly sounds a bit odd to say, but if one nutrient is lacking, everything else won't work as well in balance. So this was just for some trial work when I worked for a fertiliser company on some farm sites in Cheshire. And one was very much, well, above optimal for P, but not needing any P to be applied. And you can see in a trial of straight nitrogen against nitrogen with sulfur, there was a really good effect. Whereas you can see on this site that was suboptimal for P, yes, there was still a sulfur effect, but it wasn't as good as where nothing else was suboptimal. And the other thing, it's something I've banged on about for years, and it kind of works sometimes with some people, and it doesn't with others. One thing I found doing farm trials when I was a researcher is, or in the modelling work that we did, was that little and often works better. It's no huge surprise really. Much like we feel better if we don't try to exist on one enormous meal a day, but several smaller meals. It's much the same for the soil and the plant, and the risk of losses is much smaller. So, for example, if you put a really large end dressing on, and then we get a bigger storm, or you were expecting a shower, and that shower is actually a storm, and it causes waterlogging, there's a lot more nitrogen there to be lost as nitrous oxide. And another point that's really not very well known, and I'm sort of surprised it never seems to have come to prominence, but it's good to practice to try and leave a few days between slurry and fertiliser, again, so that you don't get waterlogging from the slurry and then adding a source of nitrate on top of it, which can result in quite significant denitrification. So you sort of let the slurry soak in a little bit. So talking about slurry, again, it's possibly easier said than done, but best practice is to utilise rather than just spread slurries. But it's important to sort of think about where they might over or under supply. So, as an example, your average slurry, average dairy slurry is about 6% dry matter if it's not in a covered container. So if you were to apply over the season your maximum allowed under an MVZ of 250 kilograms of N per hectare, you'd be supplying quite a lot of phosphorus, 115 kilos in total phosphorus, but 240 kilos of total potash, which sounds like a heck of a lot. But if you look at a traditional silage system or a traditional three-cut system, which would be about 47 tonnes of fresh weight per hectare, the phosphorus offtake's about 80 kilos, but the potash offtake is 280 plus. So you can see that if your P index is optimal, if you're putting that much phosphate on, you're probably oversupplying. But if you're putting, say, that much potash on, it's more than likely you're undersupplying. And that's something I do see a lot on dairy farms with a lighter soil. Of course, as lighter soils tend to lose potash more. And both of those things come with their inherent risks. Where P indices get higher, once they get to 3 and above, the risk of losses of the phosphorus to water through the soil profile increase hugely. Whereas if potash is suboptimal, that impacts on end use efficiency, which of course is just the last thing we want. We want the nitrogen we're applying to be utilised well by the soil and the plant. And of course, if that impacts on end use, it impacts on crude protein content of the plant. It's important for cells in the plant, so that affects water regulation, whether that's in wet times or droughty times. More things that I don't have time to sort of go into. The other thing that's important here, and in my experience, is only done to a slight degree, is taking account of the end supplied by manures and slurries and manures that you're spreading. The big thing here, and I'll try and come back to it at the end, is there's a challenge here of stocking rate, because as over recent decades, stocking rates have gradually increased, and it just means that it is hard to actually spread slurry precisely where you need it, because in a lot of cases you've got sort of too much to do that unless you actually export it, and that's a sort of bigger logistical challenge perhaps for the industry generally, and we might have to park that for now. Of course, I don't want to tread on Paul or anybody else's toes, but obviously we're talking about legumes, and what you grow is a very good way of ensuring that you use nitrogen well. And I'm sure Paul's going to cover this, but myriad benefits to grass clover swards there. Of course, within all those things, there are barriers to this and challenges, and these can be practical if when we're talking about bagged fertilizers and management on farm. They can be practical things. I mentioned the Ukraine war, but obviously price and product availability was a massive problem, and that's kind of righted itself a little bit, but not completely. And one of the things I've seen is because in that time people were using what they could get, some people have sort of carried on with that mindset, and so they're using straight N where they'd be better using NS. Not everybody, but some people, it's very much a price-based thing. But a positive on the fertiliser side is that there are newer products, or they're not particularly new in terms of their existence, but in terms of their market, things like Potash Plus, which is just potash with sulfur or polysulfate, which allow you a bit more flexibility for using straights to sort of add to what you need. As I sort of mentioned before, the stocking rate can be a challenge in terms of being able to utilise slurry to its best. Ultimately, it's a sort of it's a Western world problem, really. You know, we tend to have more intensive dairying where the stocking rates are quite high, and at some, you know, there are people trying to find ways to take the nutrients and that somewhere else, but we're probably not there yet. Also, given that I'm currently wading through derogation accounts for the Environment Agency, for my clients for the Environment Agency, there is this perceived complexity of nutrient management. And the thing I would appeal to you is, if you've got a nutrient plan being created for you, perhaps you have it done anyway, or you've entered it for SFI. Try to refer to it, because a lot of the information, or all of this information, should be in there helping you to achieve some of these things. For legumes specifically, there's some very real concerns for some people. They're worried about bloat, and others, you know, think of clovers being complex to particularly for reseeding with the challenges of weed control. I know Paul's going to go into that. From my perspective as an advisor, there is a lack of good available advice for end use that is researched and stacks up, and that's a problem I have for trying to give really cogent advice to my clients. And then and again, there is work underway, and I'm sure this project will help with that. And then the other thing is you know, patience is a virtue, as they say. To actually get the best out of legumes, it takes a little while for end fixation from legumes to reach its full potential, and to really undertake a system with, like, whether it's legumes or multi-species swards, you possibly need to think just a little bit differently and manage them slightly differently to how you used to. But none, you know, most of these things are completely surmountable. And I've just got rid of that, which I didn't intend to do. So yes, that's everything from me. So I'm happy to answer questions or discuss at the end. So
Great. Good. Yeah, that was good. I made a list of questions. I always have lots of questions. But does anyone else have any questions for Elaine on that? It's really useful, really relevant to the project for sure. Anything anyone was wondering about? We'll definitely have a discussion at the end where I'm going to kind of ask some more general questions to the whole panel too. Just a simple one, Elaine, on when you had the downward trend in fertilizer use. Of course, that's across all types of grasslands, right?
yes.
So what would be the sort of range in fertilizer use from the most, or nitrogen, let's say, nitrogen use from the most intensively managed ones?
Just area or all grass?
I guess we're thinking dairy, I guess.
Dairy, really.
I guess I'm assuming that is the most sort of the highest.
It is the highest, yeah.
Yeah.
Just thinking through my client base.
Yeah.
In dairy, it's hugely variable. You know, I've got really quite intensive grazing based clients that will only be using not well, a bit over 100, 150, 160 kilos per hectare.
Okay.
For really quite highly stocked, and that's mix of bagged and slurry, and others that more silage based. That's 172, 100 units, so it's 250. I don't have many. Well, once you take slurries into account, actual bagged use on intensive silage systems, my highest ones that I see would be around 250 kilos of bagged N, but plus slurry, and that's actually, is that a bit high? Sorry, I'm just checking. 172. Yeah, that's about right. And there is arguably scope. There is some scope there for a better integration of the slurry
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
bagged.
Yeah, good. Okay. So let's go on to James now. See if I can share the slides. Cool. Okay. Let's carry on then. Yep. Go ahead, James.
I'll have the next slide then, please, Julia. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, as Julia said, I'm James Standen. I'm the Farms Director for Newcastle. So I've been asked to give a sort of some of the emissions data that we're recording, and then some of the actions we're taking to try and reduce nitrogen, which we've been trying over the past few years. So just as a bit of background, we are, it's at Newcastle University. We're a university farm. We run about 800 hectares across 3 sites, 2 main sites. Dairy, about 250 cows, is at Nafferton. You can't really see it from the picture there, but it's that bottom left-hand little red blob. And then, so 250 cows and a grazing grass-based system. We're an autumn and spring block herd. We have around 450, 500 hectares of arable, just depending on sort of rotation and what happens. We are direct drill or regen. We don't necessarily describe ourselves as a regen. We don't think we can because of some of the trials and other bits and pieces we have to do. But we carry out a lot of the activities that you would do. And then we retain about 60 to 80 beef animals a year from the dairy that we run through grazing trials and then finish. So we're commercial teaching research, lots of activities. We have some properties. We were in pigs, and now we're sort of come out of those and we're about to go back in again. But anyway, if you put the next slide up, please, Julia. Yeah, so just as calculators, we've used all the calculators on the farm, and then so AgriCalc, farm carbon calculator, and the Cool Farm tool. We tend to run our farm stuff now through AgriCalc. We just find a little bit simpler to use, but that's not to say that it's better than the other ones. It's purely from a user point of view. It's a lot simpler. And then we also our milk goes to Arla. We are an Arla farmer owner, and I complete the sustainability, the climate check every year, and then I receive points, and points mean prizes, which for us is an additional milk price. And we suffer a little bit with our system on the Arla climate check, the carbon calculator, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, and just where their system is probably set up for a Danish farmer as opposed to a UK one like us. Next slide, please, Julia. So this is just some data out of AgriCalc, and it just shows our emissions by enterprise and by gas. And you can see we had pigs in the mix here. Dairy and then grazing and forage is separate, but you can see dairy and then is our biggest enterprise in terms of emissions, and feed digestion. Although in that slide there it will include pigs as well as dairy. But if you could click to the next slide, please, Julia. This is our dairy emissions. And I've got some comparisons there. So it shows we are a little bit behind on where we should be. Manure management, we're okay. Fertiliser, we're a little bit behind on. But this shows where our dairy is. And our biggest emissions on the dairy side is feed, the enteric methane, but also manure management and then fertiliser, both of which sort of Elaine covered in the last slide, and how you manage. So a lot of when I talk about grass management, I'll intermix it with arable because we run some of our manure and we try some of our fertiliser in the same way. But you can see that number one, by doing the calculator, I can see where my emissions are, and then we can then sort of target certain areas. We are working on a project around methane measurement, and we won't go into that today, but certainly around the sort of manure and fertiliser, and then how we go with that one. If you could just move it on one, please, Julia. Right, okay, so I thought I put another slide in here, so I obviously didn't. So in terms of in some of the reductions that we are looking at, and I'll talk a bit now as I thought I'd put a slide in with our ARLA emission data. So ARLA emission data, we do a climate check, which we now narrow down to just the dairy enterprise, because when I include the whole farm, my methane emissions, my emissions go up, and actually in the way that we run our farm, it should go down. And you've seen the other calculators, so there's obviously a discrepancy in their calculator, but it's given us a couple of areas to focus on. And the other thing we get a little bit penalised for is when we run some extensive grassland on the we run some intensive grass, we run some extensive grass. Our ARLA calculator doesn't like that, and we get penalised with points. But anyway, having been through the checks, we're now looking at some approaches, what we've tried. We 3-4 years ago, we invested in a harvest lab, which is a John Deere product. There are others on the market, and it's an NIR sensor that we put on the back of the slurry, the umbilical system for slurry, and it means we know exactly what's gone on the ground and where. And so we've been able to target applications. We use that on grassland and arable. And that gives me a total nitrogen, ammonical nitrogen. It also gives me total and available P, and then it gives me a K reading. So I get 5 data streams from that harvest lab. We signed up an agreement with a contractor, so they put it on their bit of kit. We also put that harvest lab on the forager, so we can then measure grass quality as it comes off, but a different topic of debate. So what we have done with that harvest lab is really targeted our application. It means that then when we're nutrient planning, we know exactly what's gone on, where it's gone, and we normally flat rate the harvest lab application, and then go back on with fertiliser to top up afterwards as we need to. I'll given Elaine's comments, I'll have to check that we were 10, I was at 8. So anyway, so we don't go back immediately. That'll be over the course of the season where we'll balance out. So that's been pretty good. We've seen some good effects where we've tried it with in wheat and balancing nutrition out and savings, that sort of thing, and we're still playing around with it a little bit with grass. In terms of fertiliser, I did set myself a target to reduce bagged N by 50% within 3 years, given that there were a number of products coming out. There was soil N fixing bacteria, there was the sort of the green N, the Utrisha type products that were fix N on crops, and then you get the compost teas, etc. So I thought with these products coming out, we'd run them through our system and see how they went. And what we found is we can get around 20 to 40 kilos out of them, but that's all. What we also can't do is stack. So if you take the 3 or 4 that we've got there, so the soil on the N fixing in the plant with a T, it doesn't put 120 in, it still only puts 40 in. And so it took a little bit of a back step, and I hate being beaten, so I've got to have a bit of a rethink on that one. We've played a little bit around with foliar N, not so much on grass, although we are for this project, but with arable crops, and we've tried cutting our nitrogen rates down. I know some people that have cut it to more than 50% and then have moved it back up again. And so there must be a bit of a balance there. We haven't quite got to our balance yet, and we're not doing it on a big enough area. We're trying it on a couple of areas in grass and a couple of fields with on the arable side. So we are trying a little bit on foliar N, and then we have diversified our swards, and we have increased clover. And our approach to that has always been we'll wake everything up with nitrogen in the spring, and then when the clover gets going, we'll cut back later in the season. Whether that's the right approach or not, I don't know, but it's certainly the one we've been at the moment. And so we have gone over the past couple of years just freshening up grasses. And not really one for grass, but certainly we're moving down the living mulch route for arable crops. But again, it's not. I threw it in there because we are trying to use it to reduce nitrogen. The other thing is the sort of the getting the basics right about grazing management. And when I say we, it's the royal we. Clearly, the dairy team walk the grass on a weekly basis. So we measure grass on a weekly basis, and I will sit down with Scott on every 2 or 3 weeks. We'll talk about grass, talk about nitrogen, and then we'll target poorer performing. Maybe that's with a sward lift or with nitrogen, or we'll go through. So we are regularly discussing that, but we have the data to back it up. So we're not just throwing nitrogen on with an expectation. We are measuring what the grass growth is. And we had a big leap last week. I suspect that will start to drop off as the lack of moisture at the moment is going to take a bit of effect. But if we didn't have that data, then we couldn't, then we're looking at sward performance at the end of the season that drives our reseeding program, etc. So we are collecting data. So they're sort of our main approaches, and we're sort of quite interested to see what the strip trials do that we're doing as part of this project. So I think that's me, Julia.
It's just a few days, not 10 days, James.
I misheard. Sorry.
Great, that's good. Okay, so does anyone have any follow-up questions for James on that? Like I said, oh, good, Katrina. I was going to say, Katrina, ask the questions. Yeah.
Well, I'm very interested in this trial, as you know, James. I'll be there tomorrow with Julia. So, but yeah, I'm really interested in the sward diversification question actually, and what role that's having, and how you kind of handle that basically. So, a general comment. Any more to say on sward diversification?
We have started to put some, the herbal ley type products into the sward, into the sort of the grazing rotation, and we've just increased those a little bit. So we're still playing around with those in how we would manage those within the system and using them. We would be applying less nitrogen to those. And I didn't talk, we're probably nitrogen wise, we're somewhere between 150 and 220 in terms of total nitrogen with organic matter as well. And it really depends. So we're looking to see if those will reduce, and we're just not far enough, and we don't have enough in there for the the replicates that you academics like, but we're just touching our way. What we have found is that and it might be type of season that some occasions the cows love it and some occasions the cows don't like it. Plantain on a long rotation length becomes a bit unpalatable, and the cows don't seem to like that. So we're still finding our way in how best to use that. So still learning here, really, Katrina.
Great. That's actually a good segue into Paul's talk. If no one has any burning questions, I think we might move on to Paul, who's going to talk actually about sward diversity a bit now. So, you okay to share, Paul?
Yeah, my name is Paul Muto. Currently calling myself a grassland advisor. I work for the North Pennines National Landscape, where I don't believe we have a single dairy farm. However, we do have a lot of grass that is managed, and I have worked in other areas in dairy. So what I wanted to cover today is looking at how we diversify swards for a lot of farmers. The shock of the nitrogen cost increase a couple of years ago, there was suddenly people rediscovered legumes as an alternative source of nitrogen for the farming system. And it's something that the incorporation of legumes into swards, it can be very straightforward or it can be challenging depending on how you're doing it. So I just wanted to cover that. And this also applies to herbal leys and trying to get some of the forage herb species into mixtures. So one theme I want to kind of weave through this is with a lot of our forage legumes and grasses, it's very much the hare and the tortoise. Most of our forages that have been developed for dairy systems are very much the hare. They grow very fast. They're quick off the start, germinate rapidly, grow quickly, require a lot of inputs, but they may not last as long. And at the end of the day, the tortoise gets ahead. So just a basic theme to run along with understanding our forage plants. Um, Again, we have many different types of forage systems in dairy, and what we have with, especially with herbal ley incentives, more recently is allowing herbs and legumes to be sown into permanent grass, which is a bit confusing considering a ley is normally considered a grass within an arable rotation. But as the schemes have loosened up and the interest in herbal leys have increased, it's looking at how you get these species into permanent grass. So again, this is where you need to manage your expectations for what is an appropriate legume for your system as well as herb and how you get those established. So within forage systems, you have a spectrum of everything from annual feed, where you're growing like a whole crop of cereal and peas, where the legume would be the peas fixing nitrogen, to temporary leys, 1 to 2 years, focusing on Italian ryegrass, either on its own and fertilized with nitrogen, or with rapidly growing legume. I'll cover that in a minute. You have regular reseeding of essentially grass legume mixtures, where a mixture will last 3 to 5 years before it needs to be resown. And then you also have permanent grass systems where it's never plowed out, but you may be able to oversow into it. So I'll start with the 2 year leys. 2 year leys feature a very rapidly kind of the hair in the system, Italian ryegrass. And this because they're very fast growing and very dominant, it needs to be matched with a very fast growing legume such as vetch, red clover, or even crimson clover. Generally, it's straightforward because you're sowing into a clean seed bank. All your species are starting off at the same time. The major problems you may get with that are pests, where you get things like Cetona weevil or slugs that can knock out the legumes at the seedling stage. So that's something to keep an eye on. The little notches on the edges of the clover there are a sign of Cetona weevil, and that can have quite an impact on new leys. In longer rotations of 3 to 4 year leys, you're still using a very rapidly growing grass, but not Italian ryegrass, but often it's a hybrid between Italian ryegrass and perennial ryegrass, as well as some of the faster growing perennial ryegrasses. The photo at the bottom there kind of shows usually the wider the leaf, the shorter duration of lifespan you can expect. So the clump on the left there is a hybrid ryegrass, and the narrower leaved one on the right is an intermediate perennial ryegrass. And again, you get a lifespan of maybe 3 or 4 years out of those. You do feature the rapid establishment and fast growth, and this is usually paired with red clover as part of a silage system. However, you can also graze it, in which case you'd want to have some of the large-leaved white clovers in there. The smaller leaved white clovers would probably have trouble establishing and competing in a system of very rapidly growing hybrid and perennial ryegrasses. The area that people are increasingly interested in, particularly in the low input systems or people entering SFI or countryside stewardship schemes, is trying to get clovers and herbs into permanent grass systems. And a few basic principles that I've kind of seen in action across many farms. If a grass has been established for a long time, it's very difficult to change the botanical composition. It's very well established, resistant to change. So the chances of getting new species established into permanent grass becomes more and more challenging. There's a multitude of factors that are quite complex in terms of root competition, but also pests, leather jackets, things like that, that can be a presence in permanent grass that can knock out seedlings that are trying to establish. One of the more common ways of doing it is strip seeding into existing grass. Um, in if you're using chemicals, you can knock back the existing grass with a bit of glyphosate, in which case you can slot seed into it using something like the implement in the bottom, which is an Aitchison seeder. However, for organic systems where you can't do this, you may need a little more disturbance. The top drill there is a hunter seeder, which has a like a tillage strip that will disturb the grass. Essentially, it's creating a small arable bit in the middle, and this will usually give you enough disturbance to get new species established. However, the question is, how long will those new species last? Um, just a few final points I want to make. Some of the challenges you get, particularly in organic systems, one is clover dominance, and I've seen this in some systems, particularly organic systems where you're not applying additional N. If you're getting the sward height management just about right for grazing, where you're getting that high kind of not a tall grass system, but what a lot of seed advisors will direct you towards a three-leaf stage perennial ryegrass grazing system. It's also optimal for white clover, which is great. You'll get a lot of nitrogen fixation. The clover um, will do really well because it's not overly competed. However, in areas it can become very dominant, which is a risk for bloat. Um, in that case, one is start looking at a bloat resistant or a bloat proof legume such as bird's foot trefoil. The that will help to reduce risk of bloat. Not sure what you can do with regards to areas that have become clover dominant. What happens is it's more of a dynamic spatial system where you'll get a lot of nitrogen fixation happening while the clover is dominant, and in a year or two, the grass will begin to take over in those areas. So you'll get a shifting patchwork of areas that are very high in grass but low in clover, and that's to be expected as the dynamics of nutrients shift around. One thing to consider as well is a lot of the species that are being used are quite different than what you would expect in a long-term permanent grass. So the image there that says wild versus native, that's bird's foot trefoil. The one on the left is what is commonly sold as bird's foot trefoil, and the one on the right is taken from a long-term permanent grassland, essentially a wild bird's foot trefoil. And they're very different species in terms of their growth habits, their competitive ability, as well as how long they'll last. So the wild type there will be very long-lived, not as productive. It's definitely the tortoise in the competition, whereas the uh, cultivated type on the left is one that will take off rapidly, be fairly competitive, but it may not last as long. Um, the basic principle is the bottom right picture, diversity versus yield. It's yeah, when we picture diversity in grassland, we like to see this image of lots of different species. This one has a lot of red clover in it, but again, that is a uh, not possibly native red clover, not hugely productive compared to what is being sold at the moment is red clover, which is designed for rapidly growing silage systems. And it's your expectations. If you want that level of diversity, you will be taking a hit with regards to yield. So that's would be considered a species-rich grassland there. But again, the grasses that are growing there aren't particularly high yielding. So there is always a trade-off with a lot of these systems with the species that are very quick and high yielding versus the ones that will persist over time. Um, so I'll stop it there and happy to take any questions when we get to question time.
Great, thanks. Yeah, does anyone have any questions for Paul? The silence. Oh, Katrina's got another one. Yeah.
I thought I'd go in before you made me ask one, Julia, but
Go ahead.
yeah, I'm afraid this is quite a difficult one. You touched on it briefly, that sort of trade-off in organic systems. You can't use the chemicals to knock back the species that you have. So you end up in this decision between the chemicals and the disturbance on the ground, right? And in your experience, I guess you're in an area of natural beauty. Are they still AONBs? Yeah. Is there a preference towards one or the other in those sorts in your experience, or is it just whatever's most suited for, a particular reason?
A preference for
In terms of disturbance or chemicals, or is it both? Like what's considered to be more suitable?
Yeah, I mean there are within the AONB there's probably more of a preference for disturbance. We don't have the type of farms that are as intensive. It is interesting because now you can use the herbal ley option in permanent grass. We do have more and more farmers that are spraying off their grass and sowing in herbal leys. Some are simply trying to direct drill into existing grass, and that's where, yes, they'll probably get paid for doing that, but will they have success? Well, I'm a bit doubtful. It's just those type of systems are very resistant to taking on new species, particularly ones that are more designed for higher input systems. They're they have a tough time struggling or competing with the more long-lived persistent species that are in these grasslands. So I'm hoping this summer to be monitoring some of the herbal ley options that are going in within the AONB to see how they're doing it and what kind of success rate they're getting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so interesting, that option of the herbal leys and the permanent grass. Yeah, I'm interested to see how that will work out.
It's a bit of an oxymoron, isn't it? And a lay in a permanent. Yeah, but yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've got a few questions too, but I'm going to save them, I think, till the end so Alma has a chance to say her piece. Yeah, we have just before you start, Alma, we've been talking quite a bit and referenced a few times this trial we're doing at Newcastle University, and the product I think you're going to talk about is one of the products we're testing in that trial. So as I said, we're using granular and foliar fertilizers, but we're also overlaying some of these other kind of novel products that I'd categorize maybe as biostimulants. So your product is one of them. We're also trying something called VitaRise, which is a microbial product that is to promote, I think is used really to promote sort of activity within soils. And there's another one called Fixo, which it has got nitrogen fixing bacteria and trichoderma. And that has been several farmers we know of in the region have been using that effectively on arable crops. So we're trying the Fixo as well in that trial on the grass to see how it works. So we've got those. But yeah, Alma, you want to go ahead and tell us about your product from Car Y Mor. All right, hopefully you can share your screen.
Yeah, let's give it a go.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's gonna work. Excellent.
Yeah, all looks good. Great. Thank you so much, Julia, for introducing and for taking a biostimulant along in your trials. So my name is Alma. I work for Car Y Mor. I support the sort of product development of biostimulants and fertilizers, as well as coordinating field trials. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about the product, how we trial it, and some of the stuff we've learned so far. But there we are. First, a bit of background about Car Y Mor, because I'm sure lots of you haven't heard about us before. So Car Y Mor is a regenerative ocean farm in Wales. We're in St. David's, and basically it runs as a community benefit society, meaning that, no one can extract profit from the business. It's owned by its members. We got more than 500 members now. Everyone can join for as little as £1. And it was established in 2019. but due to sort of licenses and stuff like that, the ocean farm hasn't been running. Well, it started in 2022. So here's just some pictures to show. So below you can see this is some of the lines where Car Y Mor grows the seaweed. And that's grown along with shellfish, so mussels and scallops and oysters in a multi-trophic system. The farm site is placed in the Ramsey Sound, so that's kind of between St. Justinian's and the Ramsey Island, and it's got like constant current coming in with fresh minerals and nutrients, and it kind of cleans the seaweed and results in a very sort of fast-growing, high quality seaweed. So we grow mainly sugar kelp, which is cultivated species. It's seeded onto the lines in autumn, and then it's harvested the following season. So we're just about to do the first cuts now. As you can see on the picture with the two people coming out of the seaweed, it's basically the ropes are being pulled out of the water with a crane, and then it's cut with some really good scissors. And then yeah, the shellfish are kind of growing around that in lantern nets and on ropes, and delivers multiple benefits. In the middle, there's a picture of Meg with a lobster. So Car Y Mor also works with local fishermen and buys in crab and lobster from them, and that's been quite important from the beginning to build good relationship with the fishermen. Not just because we're sharing the same sea, but also the vision is longer term for rather than like Car Y Mor right now has a 3 hectare site, and rather than expanding that, encourage fishermen to set up their own farm site along the Welsh West Coast that we can then buy and produce biostimulant. So yes, so a little bit about the journey. We've been making biostimulant for the last 3 years or so. Initially, the seaweed was meant to go mainly for food consumption, but as you can imagine, the market for eating seaweed isn't huge in the UK, and also you get the seaweed that isn't really fit for human consumption. So we basically started putting that up in some big tanks along with molasses and lactobacillus, and then fermented and make an extract, which we're still making. It's still a really good product, but in order to scale it up, we basically need a refinery. So what you can see up in the right corner is Car Y Mor, which is our new processing facility. It's almost ready. And basically the refinery that's going to be in there is going to make this cold water extract of the seaweed. So the seaweed is chopped up into really small bits, and then it's run into some big tanks with fresh water, where it's then macerated, swirled around. And as the seaweed grows in a saline environment, come in contact with this fresh water results in this osmotic shock, and then it releases its nutrients and compounds into the water, and then it's decanted and filtered from there. So that's what the other picture is, the liquid foliar feed. So seaweed's obviously nothing new. It's been used for generations, and there's lots of research that's already gone into it. So part of some of the head points of that is, seaweed's known to add lots of nutrients, trace elements, some macronutrients as well. Also improve the nutrient efficiency, so the uptake of the available nutrients in soil. It improves stress tolerance and sort of maintains growth and health in droughts and floods and temperature fluctuations and climatic stress, as well as basically kickstart the plant's defense mechanisms when it's under attack from pests and diseases. So my next slide, you probably can't see any of this, so don't worry, I can send it if anyone's interested. It's just to make a point, actually, because I've been speaking to loads of farmers about this, and when they hear seaweed, what they think is trace elements, which is true, but actually in very, very low amounts. Both macro and micronutrients. We're a bit higher on potassium and stuff as sulfates, sodium, of course, but really we're working with application rates that are 7.5 liters per hectare, which is then applied 3 times over the year. So the amounts you're applying are actually minimal. It's the upper part that we haven't been able to test yet. We're just working on finding the best facility. It's all the organic compounds that seaweed's all about. It's those that are, got growth hormones, improving root growth and general biomass, but also all these polysaccharides that are completely unique to seaweed and algae, so fucoidins, alginates, laminarin, that contribute to kickstarting the metabolism of the plant, and to improve the root growth and nutrient uptake, as well as soil health. Right. So we were actually successful with Co-op's Carbon Innovation Fund, Julia, which I don't understand why you weren't. That sounds, yeah. Anyway, so we are on our 2nd year of running some quite detailed trials on a selection of farms locally here in St. David's. And basically what we're doing is we're testing the efficacy of the product, like in fields on working farms, both conventional and organic. And we're testing potatoes, cereals, and grassland. On the conventional farms, what we're faffing about with is the fertilizer input. So on the grassland, it's prilled, and on the cereal and potatoes, it's liquid nitrogen. And we're reducing it, well, grassland by 20 and 30%, and cereal and potatoes 25 and 50%, because the uses are so high already. In combination with the seaweed, to try and see if the improved nutrient uptake can support a reduction. So we're measuring yield and quality, but also soil health benefits, mainly through sort of microbial populations, looking into that. And then on the organic trial farms, we're looking more at different application rates, as well as the above. And then we got farmer-led trials, and this is, I think we got more than 20 farmers and growers working with us now this year. It's everything from dairy, beef, sheep. We got growers, we got composters, all sorts of working businesses who's joined us. And it's much simpler. It's basically trying the product on half a field and then not on the other half, with some very simple basic data collection. And this is really important to us, because we know that what works on one farm might not work on another, and it really gives us a sense check to also see what we see in our co-op trials, that actually replicates out on other farms. And then also, being a community benefit society, it's all about building connections and being on this journey together, because it's actually not just us trying to sell a product. We wanna work together, and we wanna learn from those with experience, and keep on improving and feeding back into our local communities. So we had some good data from our last year's trials. Not all trials went as planned, but there we are. That's field trials for you. So one that was good was one we did with Farming Connect up on one of their demonstration farms in Lampeter, with a beef and sheep farmer. And what they were actually looking at was establishment of red clover in their silage fields. So they established with direct drilling and with an apical harrow. And then within those fields, they had with and without the seaweed. So there wasn't any replicates, but nonetheless, what they did see was quite a significant yield increase from the treated plots. 18% overall, resulting in almost 92.33 pounds extra per hectare. And then you can see the quality analysis underneath below, with quite a lot higher on crude protein, sugars as well. So we basically now this year have learned lots from what we did last year, and we're expanding on that, and hopefully after the season we'll have a lot more data to share, and also have some knowledge from the GreenGrass project as well. So thank you very much, and there we are. Oh, that's a good picture of the sea farm. Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
Thanks. That's so interesting. A little bit different than the other ones, looking at the seaweed farm for a change. Yeah. So does anyone have any questions for Alma? First of all, and then we might just go to a wider discussion. But any specific ones for Alma?
I can jump in.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, this is quite a specific one, I guess. How is it that you're assessing soil health on the trials that you have at the moment? You mentioned something to do with microbes, was it? Or
Yeah, so we do a little bit of a mix. So we do microscopy testing, working with the lab in Reading, and then we also sort of support that with the microbiometer. Mixed opinions on that, and then obviously we're doing soil testing. So we're looking at elements, organic matter, exchange capacity, and so on.
that's cool. Yeah, thank you. Just I'm interested. I like soil testing, so thanks for letting.
Yeah. I was wondering just and Alma, you might not know the answer to this one actually, but someone else on the panel might, whether because the micronutrients that your product would be providing, is that something that some of these legumes and herbs particularly might benefit from? Do we have evidence that that we are getting low in some of the trace elements in our UK farming systems? Does anyone have any comments on that?
I do actually have a comment on that, because
Oh
I
yeah,
was
sure.
working with another guy who quite did some trials on zinc actually, and zinc's
Oh yes.
impact on efficient nitrogen fixations from clover.
Okay.
And you need very, very little, but yeah, that's in seaweed.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. Yeah. What do you think how do you think it affects the the palatability of the forage? Do you have any information on that, or is that something that that might be a concern, James, or a plus, do you think? A little bit of salt?
We have done some soil testing and looking at sort of micronutrients as well as macro, but when we've looked at them, we haven't really found much difference. And where we're applying slurries in rotation, we would tend not to worry too much about that, given that we're putting that back on. In arable crops, we'd be applying copper, zinc, boron, manganese, and one or two other traces, just depending on what crops look like through the season to get the most out of them. We tend not to do that with grass too much. But a lot of ground is deficient in selenium and cobalt, hence they put those in the drenches that for sheep that you might ask, although it's not enough really to help the sheep, but that's a different matter. But we know we are deficient in grass and grazing systems, certain key nutrients.
Yeah, interesting. I have quite a list of different questions here. I don't know if does anyone else have any, or should I look at my list? Oh, here's one coming through on the chat, actually. Let me just open the chat here. Oh, yeah. Great. Do advisors have enough confidence in current knowledge of plantain effects on nitrogen losses? Oh, there's even a paper cited there to use percent in the sward to inform and recommendations. Interesting. And I wonder if that's Paul, you probably know, Paul and James both have got that experience with that New Zealand variety of plantain that's supposed to be magically reducing nitrogen loss. So it's the suggestion that you actually apply less N to those fields with the plantain in them, James.
The variety that we've got is was Ecotane, now Agritane, for a DLF product that they say will mop up nitrates more efficiently than plantain will, and this variety will mop up better. I don't know whether the data matches that in New Zealand. In terms of plantain and grazing, we've noticed that unpalatability when your grazing extends to sort of more than 24, 25 days. So whether it's still sucking up nitrogen or but it just makes it unpalatable. I don't know, but certainly that sort of round length, you need to be a bit shorter. I know we haven't had well, we have, but we've managed to do that. Plantain doesn't, you know, as Paul was talking, doesn't last very long in the sward, whether you establish it to start with or whether you just keep going with it. It does tend to disappear after 3, 4, 5 years. And I know in New Zealand, where they get rewarded for having plantain in there, they're constantly topping up pastures where they're getting their license to farm through their systems over there. So I know not in terms of nitrate, not N losses as the question, but hopefully we've got some in the grazing platform now at Nafferton, where we might get 1 or 2 of those answers. But
It's actually made me think, James, we should probably be just at least informally documenting, or, you know, we could possibly be reporting on some of that within GreenGrass as well, how effective that was. Yeah. Oh, I was about to ask Paul a question. He's just appeared in my room because he says the screen has frozen. I thought you were looking very intently at the screen. Let me unplug my thing. So, because I was going to ask you actually, if you wanted to say something about that as well. Still?
Can people hear us? Yeah.
Okay.
I think with the plantain, yeah, it's certainly touted as a way to reduce nitrogen losses from the system. I'm not sure if it's really meant to reduce the need for inputs. I think there's several mechanisms by which it will theoretically reduce nitrogen loss from the environment. And I guess if it is recycling it within the system, that is better. But I'm not, as James pointed out, it's not particularly long-lived, which is ideal if you're trying to sell seed to farmers because they'll have to buy more. Certainly, if you have a permanent grassland in most parts of certainly the north of England, you'll get native plantain, which will be there forever. It seems to last either the individual plants or it'll keep reseeding. Whether it's that much different than what a native plantain would give you, I don't really have the data to flesh that out or not.
Following that one, Elaine, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned about the advice in RB209, or well, you didn't actually mention RB209. You said lack of good available advice for end use, and I just was going to say, well, is RB209 not good enough then for people to make? Is it particularly when there's legumes in the sward that it gets a little unclear on what you should be doing?
I did. It's the fertiliser manual these days, but no, there is a little bit of advice in there, but it's minimal, and I'm not sure what's behind it. And the only thing, you know, it says a little bit about red clover, and for white clover, it says you might want to consider up to 50 kilograms at the start of the season to start the grass, and up to 50 kilograms at the later season to keep the grass going after the clovers, because of course clover is later to come and sooner to go. So it's not good, and it's when, you know, for people like me that are trying to do nutrient plans for people, there's not a great deal of advice of really cogent advice out there, and it's not on my part for want of looking. And even, you know, I looked when I had the opportunity, I did do some trial work, small scale trials, just trying to look at it, and didn't get very far. I was just with white clover, and it wasn't a particularly good trial site, so I'm not sort of basing anything on that. But no, there is a dearth of advice, and I even checked with a partly through just some plans I'm doing at the moment, but just thinking of this, I checked with a good friend in the industry just to make sure I wasn't being grumpy, and he wholeheartedly agreed with me. So and it's actually, I mean, there is actually, I'm trying to think where I saw it, but there is a new project called New Leg, which is trying to look at really nailing down nutrient use for legumes, and how low you can drive it and still get the response, or the best management to get the response. And that's, I think it's a Horizon 2020 program, but it's a multi-partner program. But the thing, I mean, the thing I would say is the tide has turned a lot, because the person I asked is a very senior in a fertiliser company, and he's talking about driving down end use to make the legumes do their job, and unfortunately that's one of the things I see. I mean, somebody I've experienced lately is trying new things like grass red clover sward, despite the fact I say just use some slurry to replace the P and K, he's still putting N on it, and you think, well, don't tell me you're skint, because you don't need to. So there's a sort of mix of things going on, I think, but the will in the industry is there to sort of shift end use, because it's blindingly obvious. It's the way we've things have got to change for sustainability. So but there really isn't the advice there that gives people like me or a farmer, if they're looking for it themselves, something particularly cogent to hang their hat on. And it's a kind of, I'm sure I'm sort of looking at the names and wondering if there's organic farmers there. I'm sure organic farmers are probably screaming at me, we don't need N at all. And no, of course you don't, if you're prepared to set your system up like that and manage it accordingly. But as I said in my talk, there is, and Paul very much said, you have to tweak your management, manage your expectations, and think just slightly differently. It's if you're going to really make the best of it. So seeing some not necessarily organic advice that helps people have the confidence to use modest amount of nutrients but get what they need is in my view what we need.
Okay, so it's more evidence then, is it, on
I think evidence, not in the sense of proof, but I think evidence in the sense that it hasn't. I don't think it's been really looked at. I think there's been odd over the years. Like say, I did a little bit when I worked for a fertiliser company, just trying to put some evidence behind that RB209 fertiliser manual statement, but my results weren't particularly good, and it didn't give me any confidence. The caveat to that is I'm conscious it wasn't a good site, but there hasn't been very much work done on it. So it's really just it's helping farmers and advisors to have something sort of cogent that they can use that says, this works. Yeah. Which everything else, the rules for what can go in the fertiliser manual in terms of recommendations are quite strict. And there doesn't seem to be the same advice, because it's just not there. There are quite a lot of gaps on nutrient advice for, I was going to say grassland, but livestock systems. I think there's a lot more research in arable systems
That's
in terms of targeted nutrient use.
Yeah. I guess, and I've been really grappling with that, the whole question around is especially for dairy farmers, is it just a lack of confidence that, or worry that if they cut their nitrogen too much, it's gonna affect the bottom line, really? It's not, James, is that why you're still using the rates you are on your grass swards, just as an insurance policy almost?
Feed the cows. That's the
well, we're more confident in cutting rates on nitrogen on grass, particularly when we have clover and slurry as a backup. Certainly we're less confident in arable crops to cut rates of nitrogen and still deliver the same yield. Maybe that will come, but certainly that's where our confidence sits at the moment.
Yeah. And here's my last question, because we need to stop it. Is a provocative one maybe, is nitrogen fertilizer just too cheap? Does anyone on the panel have a thought on that?
I mean, I can come back on, I suppose, on the evil person that worked in the industry. So, but I don't think these days it's too cheap. I think it's easy to sort of, without, I don't mean it to be an unpleasant reply, but it's easy to wing around things like that. And arguably, it used to be too cheap. But I mean, when I first started as a researcher, I did some survey work with farmers, and I said, do you use a nutrient plan? Oh yes, the man from ICI tells us what to use. And it was basically what used to be an RB209, which for grazing was 60, 60, 60, 40, 40, 40, which is a hell of a lot of fertiliser. And most people would be pale at the thought of that. But milk prices were good. Fertiliser at 80 quid a tonne, and it could be done. And you sure as heck grew a lot of grass. But then we realised that there were losses from that, so we started looking at that. Then milk price went down and fertiliser price went up, and so I think these days it's not as cheap. But I think it's kind of an insurance. It's probably not as simple as an insurance, but it's a case of, if your system is set up with 2.5 cows to the hectare stocking rate, if you try something really new and all of a sudden you've got 2/3 of the yield, you've got a problem because you haven't got enough forage for your stock. So, and then you're buying in. So it's insurance it's not so much insurance as perhaps an element of risk averse. And hence needing the information to say, this is what you can get if you do this with a grass clover sward.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for contributing. It was really interesting, really useful for us as we're just trying to think about the what the challenges are, what the barriers are. I took a snip of your screen, Elaine, on your list of barriers and challenges. Really useful. That'll help guide us on the sort of some of the focuses for this project. And do keep in touch. I think, Philip, have we given people a way to get in touch with us? Or does everyone know how to get in touch with us, I guess?
Yes, there will be for everybody that's attended, for those who haven't been able to attend, or some people that have only been able to attend the part of the webinar, they'll receive like a follow-up email with all our information on and details. And again, if there is any other questions you want asked, and you want it maybe forward to one of the panels, we can also forward it on to the panel members as well. There is a project page for GreenGrass as well. I'd just like to mention that. It's obviously as loose as Julia and everybody has explained. It is a new project, and this is the project launch. So there is some outline information about the GreenGrass project at the moment, but there will be updates and more information going about the project. And as we go out and visit farms and what work we're doing on farm with the farmers, there will be information and updates up there. So please keep an eye out for that, and there'll be a link on the follow-up email to that page.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to our speakers, and thanks for everyone who joined. And let's keep in touch.
Thank you very much.
Bye.